Good evening, everyone. I'm Trinea Reed. I am the Workforce Development Manager here at the Amputee Coalition. And this evening, we have the pleasure to meet with Solomon Romney. Solomon is the Accessibility Program Manager at Microsoft, and he oversees the Microsoft Inclusive Tech Lab. And thank you so much, Solomon, for being here this evening. It's a pleasure to have you.
Pleasure to be here. Always happy to chat. So so I am in the Inclusive Tech Lab here at Microsoft. We can get into that in a little bit, just to sort of, ground myself in this. Obviously I am limb different myself from birth. It's congenital, not the result of trauma, but a lot of the work that I do here, because we work on hardware. The Inclusive Tech Lab's a hardware lab. And so a lot of the work we do here is about mobility. It's focused on mobility. How do you physically interact with the device? So my particular focus obviously is limb difference and various other mobility disabilities that face similar difficulties when interacting with technology. And so the work I get to do here is directly related to that, to my identity as a person with limb difference and the community, that I belong to, along with the greater disability community. So the Inclusive Tech Lab exists to serve the disability community. That's why we created this space in the first place. That is its North Star. That is the one thing we will always be devoted to. So everything we do here has to be in service to the community. That's the sort of boring part. We get to make some cool stuff. That's the fun part. I get to make cool tools and things like that. So like we made, the Inclusive Tech Lab is where the Xbox Adaptive Controller came from, which was originally developed for wounded veterans coming back, amputees coming back from wars overseas who no longer could game. And that was our primary group we worked with in developing that controller. And then similar groups as we've moved through, the intervening, we're 9 years since that work started. The lab's not quite that old. The lab was created a couple of years after that, but we've just continued to build on that sort of relationship and that model of interacting with the community and co-creating products. So, you may have heard nothing about us without us before, and that's something that the lab is founded on, the idea that we're not building for people with disabilities, we're building with people with disabilities. And so, I've been on this team now 4 years. I've been with Microsoft for most of the last decade, with a little break in the middle. But yeah, this is where I get to, my passions get to come together. I get to celebrate and be part of the disability community. I get to be part of design and engineering on making products, and it is a very rare and privileged place to work. So yeah, it's nice to work for a company that actually supports these endeavors and supports disability and really believes in it. I know that may sound like, corporate PR, but it's not. Genuinely, the company cares. It puts resources into it. The company's filled with people with disabilities and allies who care about making, equitable experiences for people with disabilities, even, as part of our larger disability equality or diversity, equality, and inclusion principles and things like that as well. But there is a passion for this in the company. It's not something we just talk about. It's something that many of us do live every day. And so, the room I'm in, the lab itself, was created to support that, to bring those communities together and to facilitate that conversation around, what does the community actually need? Are we solving that problem? And are we doing it in a way that is authentic and genuine, and that the communities had input in, that it's not just something we're inventing. It's something that we are addressing real problems with and real needs. And that's kind of the fun of working in hardware. At the end of the day, we make stuff. Like there's objects that I can look at and go, yeah, that's the result of 2 or 3 years work, but it's a thing. And that thing lets people do things they never could before. And so, yeah, my history with Microsoft actually started in the retail channel. So I was a retail worker, frontline worker, working in the Microsoft stores back when they existed. And that gave me the chance to interact with customers directly. You know, people with disabilities, people without disabilities, to see, you know, to get a real sense of the struggles people were having with technology. You know, whether it was from an accessibility standpoint or a cultural one or a generational one or things like that, where, you know, really coming to understand where the struggles were. And that's been vital to, you know, to being able to advocate and represent customer needs, you know, in the hardware space. I loved it. I miss stores. It was a great experience. It was, in many ways, for me, and I will say that I am part of a small group that this was the case for. Being part of stores was my doorway into Microsoft. Now, that wasn't true for a lot of folks. I want to, you know, as we're talking employment and stuff, I want to set realistic expectations about some of these things. That also the retail channel doesn't exist anymore. But for some folks, it was a doorway in. Like I probably wouldn't work for Microsoft if I hadn't been part of the retail stores and had the opportunity to talk about accessibility that role provided. Like I wouldn't be here today without stores. I'd be doing something else. And so, yeah, that was a great place to make those connections and have the opportunity to take a position in a company that supports accessibility and be able to actually speak about that with customers in a meaningful way. It also, you know, they afforded me with opportunities to speak on a larger stage about that. That's how I got involved with the adaptive controller. That's how, you know, I was lucky enough to end up on the stage at E3 when Forza Horizon 4 was announced with the controller, and, you know, and other things like that helped me build my brand and my identity as an employee around accessibility and things like that. So it also, I think, sort of the beauty of the retail stores that you lose in more specialized parts of the company is retail had to understand everything that Microsoft made. They had to understand all of the products, the hardware, they had to understand the software, they had to understand the systems and how they all interacted together, which is something that, other than potentially our support teams, no one else in the company is expected to do, to have that sort of broad universal knowledge of Microsoft products. And so that was I think that was part of the beauty of being in that retail position, was getting to see sort of the bigger picture in a lot of ways of like, oh, here's how these things interact, and here's where there's gaps, and here's where customers are really delighted and things like that. So I treasure the time I got to spend in retail, in stores. I think it was a invaluable experience for me in understanding customer needs. You know, and not to mention just the special memories that come from that as well. You know, midnight product launches when, you know, when an Xbox comes out, and just being part of that excitement of people, you know, back before COVID, when people, you know, we'd get together for these in-person moments. And there was something, you know, really magical about that. Seeing the store transformed for holiday, and just the change in the atmosphere, and you know, at the end of the day, we could sit down and go, okay, we've helped a person, or we've helped people today, you know, do things they never could before, either by getting them product or by training them on things to help them be better at what they need to do. And so that direct experience was hugely, hugely valuable. And I miss stores. I miss them every day. And so that, that was part of it. And then through those interactions, I made contacts, here at corporate that helped me get involved in greater Microsoft activities. And then I left for a little while because I realized there was a gap in my knowledge that I needed to go fill that I couldn't fill in the role that I was in. So I went to work for an assistive technology company, Tobii Dynavox, where Tobii sells communication devices and eye gaze devices and things like that. And that really was a very different way of interacting with customers face to face, because it was just me and just them with this product. It was very much a one-to-one experience of helping set up and give voices to the voiceless and things like that, while also giving me a really deep knowledge of that kind of assistive technology. And then it was that experience that made me valuable, and that really sort of tipped the scales in me being able to come back, was having knowledge that was not common here at Microsoft. So I think, just sort of looking at my own career, the advice, looking back, that if I could give myself from 10 years ago, was that it's not a straight path to your goal. Rarely is it just a single line and you just march along that. There's going to be zigging and zagging. You're going to have to move sideways. Sometimes you might have to move out to come back in. That it's, how do I put this? I wish I had been more humble during that time, because there were opportunities that I was presented with that would have gotten me into this space sooner, doing the work that I love, if I had been willing to look at things from a different perspective, rather than being so focused and so driven on a single type of outcome that I wanted, that frankly did not exist. The role and the work that I wanted to do at the time, 5-6 years ago, that I was really agitating for it, the company just wasn't there yet. And rather than sort of going in some, alternate directions to learn and become involved and pick up other skills and things like that, while the company caught up, I took a very sort of all or nothing attitude. And that was a bad choice. I don't regret what came, being able to go to Tobii and do all of that. Like, I don't. But in looking back, if I had been more flexible, if I'd been willing to consider things, if I had been less driven by a singular goal, I would have had better opportunities to get into things sooner and wouldn't have had to struggle in some of the ways that I did. And so being flexible on what the end goal is, and recognizing that you're not going to go straight from A to C. You've got to go to B, and B might be off somewhere else, is probably the thing I'd really want to impart, to me 10 years ago, and to you as well, getting into the job market, is I don't know that anyone immediately gets into their dream job. And to be honest, it wasn't until I left and came back that I realized that I hadn't been ready before I left to move into the role and do the work that I wanted, and that I thought I was ready for, that I felt was in some ways owed to me. I wasn't ready for that. And it took leaving and coming back and working at it from a different angle to realize that I just was not there. And, so there's great value in being humble and being open to learning and to looking at other directions to get you where you want to go. Because experience is never going to have a negative value. The more you learn, the more you do, the more you pick up, the richer it's going to make you moving forward in your career. And to be honest, you'd be surprised what unrelated things can really prove to be valuable in very unexpected ways. Like, for example, my background is not engineering. I'm not a designer. I'm not a programmer. I don't have science degrees. My background is in theater and literature and Shakespeare. You know, I come from about as far away from technology as you can get. You know, I studied and wrote about things that happened, you know, 400 or 500 years ago. But the skills that I picked up doing that in terms of being able to speak and present, and the way that that kind of creative work teaches you to think, things that I never would have thought would have been applicable here have actually proven to be very valuable in advancing my own career. And so if I'd gone straight through engineering and things like that, yeah, it would have been a different outcome. I may have gotten here sooner, but I probably wouldn't be doing the work I'm doing. And I wouldn't have picked up all those other skills and experiences that are really valuable in the work that I do every day now. Like, they've become such a fundamental part of this role that I'm in now, that if I hadn't done that, I don't think this role would, I don't know if I'd even have it or if I'd be as successful. You know, so yeah, I definitely would encourage, look across the spectrum, look at all sorts of things. The other thing is, in accessibility, it's very much a passion and personal driven thing. Now, obviously, you all have your own lived experiences with disability that makes that, you know, that's a step of one. You know, you already have that understanding, and that is a huge benefit to you and to your prospective employer. Because the way that we make a more inclusive workplace is by getting people with disabilities in the workplace. And the way we make more inclusive products is by getting people with disabilities into product making. And that doesn't mean that you have to work in accessibility. It just means that you need to be thinking about inclusion and accessibility while you're doing your work. You know, all of that said, having an engineering, computer science, those hard science degrees, those STEM degrees, definitely makes it easier to get into a place like Microsoft. You know, and if I'd gone that route instead of theater when I had the option to choose that as an undergrad, yeah, I probably could have ended up here 15 years earlier. But is that the math right? Yeah, I did the math right. But that doesn't mean I'd be doing the work I'm doing. I'd be doing something else, you know? So those certainly help, but they're not a barrier. No one on my team really has the technology degree of any kind. Like, my manager he did get he does have a computer science degree, I think, of some kind, but he got it a long time ago, and he's basically just worked in online banking for most of his career. You know, so not necessarily related to the work we do. But you know, one of my colleagues studied photography, one of the others journalism. You know, like, there are places where, you know, non-traditional backgrounds have a place in technology, but you've got to really work to find it. You know, STEM certainly is easier. There's a reason people do that. There's a reason there's so many more jobs for that, but it's certainly not the only path. So if you are, you know, following your passion into the humanities, the arts, don't be discouraged. Just, I would urge you to think creatively about how those skills can be applied in other arenas. You'd be surprised. Yeah, so it's not that I would necessarily suggest a particular career path. It's really more of a mindset. And also being, you know, do your homework on your prospective employers. What is their commitment to things like accessibility? What is their accommodations plan? You know, what are they, as much as you can find out ahead of time. You know, there's always most companies are very public about accessibility stats and things like that. You know, and Microsoft in particular, we put out a lot of content around that. We make a lot of products. We talk about it a lot, you know, and so it's a matter of, one, you know, find the right role, sure, but you also need to find the right company, and doing your homework on that is important, because the way that Microsoft thinks about accessibility is different than Amazon or Apple or Google or Meta. You know, we all have different areas we're focused on and different areas where we're stronger or weaker, you know, and then the culture that goes around that. You know, Salesforce is different. You know, everybody's got a different approach. We all agree it's a good thing. It's how we execute that's different. So I'm going to pause for a second. Shania, do you have any questions or something you'd like me to touch on more?
Well, thank you, Solomon, first off, for sharing your story. I think it's super enlightening, and just sharing your journey, into Microsoft, going into Microsoft in the retail industry for a number of years, and then stepping out, and getting experience within the assistive technology field and arena, and then coming back, within your current role. And then also, having a background that's not related to IT or computers, but using that experience from that education to really build the groundwork to where you're at today.
Yeah,
So,
and it took time. It was not something that happened overnight. Like it very much was a like 10 year, 15-year journey to make that transition. So it did take time. But yeah, and I was discouraged. I will say I was discouraged for a long time, because I'd gone and studied, got my degrees, and then was, in many ways was doing entry-level work next to people right out of high school. And that was hard to deal with. But that's where I come back to that humility thing. Like, nothing's ever wasted. And I think for a long time I thought like the work I had done was. But, as you take a longer look at it, it's not actually the case. But there was a lot of struggle I had internally about that, in coming to terms with, yeah, I went and I did all this education and I'm not working in that field. Can I find a way to make that work in the field that I am in? And I will say I sort of fell backwards into Microsoft by accident, to be perfectly honest. I had moved to Maryland to start a prosthetics company that failed immediately. And so I was unemployed for a while, and came across, I kid you not, on Craigslist, a job listing for Microsoft opening a new retail store, which is the last thing I had been thinking about doing at that time, but I took the chance on it. At first, I didn't believe it. I was like, Microsoft listing on Craigslist? And then I followed up on it. I was like, no, it's actually legit. It's not the weirdest way I've ever gotten a job, but it's certainly up there. So it was just one of those, because I remember looking at that listing going, yeah, I'm not tech, but I know retail. And and making the decision to apply it, and the same was sort of true with the role I'm in currently. I was very happy working for Tobii Dynavox. I was at their main campus, 6 months into that job, doing our new hire sort of, training visit. And I was like, that morning, I remember getting up and going, all right, I'm fully committed to Tobii. I'm over my Microsoft breakup. And then I got a call that night telling me about this role. And, and having to go, having to decide between leaving something I really was enjoying doing, or going back to something that I had wanted to be doing, but that wasn't quite the thing that I had originally been after, and making that and choosing to make that jump. Yeah, it was none of that was really planned. And I think that's okay, because what I've found, and I get asked this a lot, like, And people are always big believers in what's your 5-year plan? And I go, I'm good if I've got 6 months at a time. Because when I look back at where I was 5 years ago or 10 years ago, this is nowhere near where I thought it. And so when we talk about being flexible and things like that I've mentioned, a little bit before, I think that's part of it too. Don't lock yourself into those kind of plans. And then as you start to diverge more and more from them, then you just start to make yourself feel bad. And that's not the right way to go. I think it's good to have general goals, and directions that you want to move, in 5 or 10 years, but don't tie yourself down in specifics too heavily, because you never know where that opportunity is going to come from that really leads you where you want to go. And so that's, if I had been so rigid about the work I wanted to do, which I wanted to get back into theater, if I had been so just like, that is all I'm going to do, I never would have applied for the Microsoft job. And what a different world it would be for me. So yeah, it's staying flexible enough to recognize opportunities that may come from unexpected places. But that's a hallmark, I think, of my career is sort of in some ways stumbling into things that turn out to be really great. So yeah, and I will say, getting to work on hardware and bring a limb different perspective to it, and then actively make things for limb different people, I could not ask for a better environment to work in. Like, at the end of the day, I can look at things like the touchpad on my laptop here that has the new adaptive touch mode, which, if you don't have these, touchpads can be really difficult to use. But now I've got a mode on there that I can turn on that makes my left hand with no fingers just as accurate as the fingers on my right hand. And that's huge. But it's something we never would have thought of. I don't think it would have been an issue that came up if limb different people hadn't been included in the product discussions. And I got to do a lot of, very direct and involved work on that. And so then, when I get up and present it to the world for the first time and essentially go, this is for you, my people, this is for you, that's hugely rewarding. And so, yeah, I mentioned this to somebody else the other day, and I think it bears mentioning here, which is, don't let other people tell you what you can't do. But also, I think, don't in your own mind limit yourself as well. If there's something you want to do, there's a way to do it. It's just how much work it takes to get there, and how much work, from an employment standpoint, is your employer willing to do in return. And, so I would encourage you not to look at something and go, well, I just can't do that job because of, XYZ. This is what we call the growth mindset. It's, you may not be ready to do that yet. There's always more you can learn. There's skilling. There's lots of ways to get there. So just be flexible, man. I guess that's the whole point of what I'm trying to get across is, you've got to stay fluid. You've got to stay fluid, because there's so many unexpected things that will happen, good and bad, that you just got to be able to roll with it to a certain extent. Now, shifting gears a little bit to talk specifically about the kind of opportunities that are available at Microsoft, in a little more detail. Obviously, you've got your programmers and your engineers of all flavors and things like that. So, and Microsoft is always hiring. I think right now we have 300,000+ people working around the world. The difference, I would say, between now and pre-COVID is that so many more of these jobs are remote friendly, can be done remotely. And I know for a lot of folks that's limiting, depending on your mobility, depending on on your travel situation, your home situation. Going into an office may not be viable. Doesn't mean you can't do the job. It just means you can't, you know, go to a specific place in space to do it. But what we found over the pandemic was that a lot of these jobs didn't need that they could be done just as effectively from anywhere in the world. And so there are more opportunities like that available now than ever before at the company. I mean, and there are, I guess the other thing to understand is that Microsoft is made up of so many different companies that fit under the Microsoft umbrella that there are opportunities everywhere. Like when I say there's 300,000 Microsoft employees, that's just Microsoft. That doesn't include the game studios. That doesn't include, LinkedIn or any of these other. I don't even think at this point that includes Activision, Blizzard, King. The big game studio acquisition we had, and so there are a lot of ways to get in. There's quality testing is a very low bar to get in, especially with the games, with the game studios and things like that. Now, it's not making video games isn't just playing video games all day. Like there's a lot of work that goes into it. We run into folks who are like, oh yeah, I'll work for the studio and it'd be great. We'll just do all this kind of fun stuff. And it's like, well, no, there's actually a lot of work that goes into it, but those are some of the best jobs to get in, to learn the system and to move up in studios and things like that. Any of the QA testing, any of the we do have call centers, we do have technical support. We have specifically a disability answer desk that is staffed by people with disabilities, for people with disabilities to call in about how to get their tech to work together. Like there are a lot of, when we talk about entry level and not necessarily super tech heavy roles, there are a lot of them here. The other big thing that I would advise folks for, and this was something that I struggled with, when I talked about being too proud about some things, Microsoft hires a massive amount of vendors, which are people who are paid and employed by a third-party company, but do work on behalf of Microsoft. So I did that for 2 years. So I was technically employed by another company called Protingent, but all of my working hours, everything I did was for Microsoft. So Microsoft paid Protingent, Protingent paid me. And that is one of the best and most classical ways to get in to Microsoft as well, is because vendor roles can be for very specific things, but oftentimes they're also a great way to learn and bring someone up, so that in a year or two, you can convert them, or you can create a full-time role that they can move into and things like that. So don't be snobby like I was. Vendor roles are a great way to get started. And it was I loved those 2 years as a vendor that I did as well, because I really did get the opportunity to learn a lot of things that I wouldn't have otherwise, I think, had the time to. It provided a different structure than what a full-time Microsoft employee deals with, just in terms of time and responsibilities, that is also supportive of learning those sorts of things. So there's tons of opportunities on the vendor front that I would encourage you to find. The challenge with those is they're not listed on Microsoft's career site. They are going to be listed through the vendors' agencies themselves. So it does require a little more effort to track those down, but a lot of them will also post on, the job sites, LinkedIn Jobs, Indeed, Monster, and stuff like that. So you may get, what you'll see are probably vague posts that say things like, oh, technology company, and it could be any of the big ones, but the listing that they'll put up is actually written by the folks at the company that is hiring. So like when we put out a call for a vendor, I write that description, and that's what actually goes out. And so if you're savvy about them, about reading them. You can see cues that can suggest which company it is. But the vendor track is a hugely powerful tool if you can get into it. And there are a lot of ways. There's actually, I think, more vendors than actual Microsoft employees. So don't discount that. Yeah, I'm going to pause again. Question, thought?
No, those are all really great points, Solomon. I think, for our YEP participants that are within the 15 to 17 range that are getting ready to transition out of high school, whether that's into employment right away or college, I think you give a great perspective on, even though you might have a goal or a vision or a career field, that could always change, and that's okay.
Yeah.
You might lead to saying, okay, I want to be in IT, and then maybe you're in your first year of college and decide, maybe this is not what I want to do, or maybe this is not what I want to do right now, and taking a step away and then coming back and maybe exploring other things and then saying, oh yeah, IT was really what I wanted to do. So, just your journey of like explaining that you might have a certain career path that you envision for yourself. And I know for myself too, when I was younger, I was like, yeah, I'm going to do this. And this is the only goal that I had set for myself. And then once I got to college, I was like, no, I didn't like that, and switch gears, so I think it's important to, to understand for our YEP participants to understand and realize that it's okay, if the vision that you had for yourself initially, doesn't always pan out to where it wanted to be or what you thought it would be, and that's okay.
Oh, yeah. I mean, my journey's filled with those sorts of, when I was that age, when I was 15 to 17, I was splitting my time evenly between the theater and the science labs. I was doing math competitions. And so when I had to make the choice on colleges, I decided to go into theater rather than engineering. And then it was, 8 straight years of theater school. And in the very last year of that, I realized what I really wanted to do was make prosthetics. And as I was exploring careers, at that age, I interned for, political, for politicians. I worked as a clerk at a law firm because I thought, oh, maybe I want to get into that, and then realized working at the law firm, no, that is not at all the experience I want to have. And so there are, I mean, there were a lot of other paths I could have taken, and it's good to explore those. But yeah, I've seen friends who, got to college and had a very clear plan on what they wanted to do, and a semester or two in went, no, I actually am really much more interested in this other thing. And that's okay. That's normal. That's natural, follow that curiosity. But yeah, I know very few people who set out and said, I'm going to do this, and then followed in perfect step every way to do that. Like, I don't really know anybody who's lived that kind of life. Doesn't mean they don't exist. I just don't know them. But the majority of everyone I know, it's never been that kind of line. And like you said, it might not be now. It might be something like, like I had to do. I came back to engineering, almost a decade later, because I realized there was a part of me that needed that just as much as another part of me needed theater, and then finding a way to bring them together. But yeah, it's don't lock yourself down. Explore as many things as you can at this age. Gather as many different experiences as you can, because it's going to inform your choices. It's going to make them so much. You're going to have so many better choices, and you're going to have more, I think, of an understanding of what you want and what you don't want, which is equally important. And I think that's how you find a more satisfying path forward, is by doing those explorations. And so embrace that. It may feel uncertain. It will definitely feel uncomfortable. Change always does. If change was comfortable, it wouldn't really be change. So, lean into that. challenge yourselves to go try new things. Also, don't be afraid to follow your passion. You know, if there's something that matters to you, go work on that. Doesn't mean you have to make that your career, but, you know, do work that fills you and figure out what that balance is. So yeah, go explore, have fun. You're at an amazing age where you have a ton of opportunity ahead of you, and don't tie yourself down. Spread those wings, check stuff out. Don't worry so much about the future at that point. Like, even until you, honestly, until you're into your second year of college, if you go that route, you don't really have to have settled on what you want to do. And if you decide to go, you know, the trades route or directly into the workforce, you know, how do I put this? You're not, just because past you made a decision doesn't mean present you is committed to that. You don't owe an obligation to that earlier version of yourself if something else has come up in the meantime or you've changed. You know, so just because you decide to do something now doesn't mean you're going to be doing that forever. So yeah, it's go and explore. Try different things. Everyone should work retail or some sort of customer service, I think, at some point in their life, just because I think it just makes us better people. It makes us more patient. It makes us more understanding. There's a lot of lessons to learn there. You know, but you know, chase dreams, but also don't lose sight of the practicality of what you need to get done. And there are ways you can do both. Just might mean, you know, you have to decide how you split your time. But yeah, take the years you have right now to really just check it all out. So yeah, it's the best advice I can give you. Let's try everything.
No, that is excellent advice, you know, and I definitely agree with you, Solomon, about being in a retail role. You know, I know for myself, you know, my first job was a retail role, and just all of the skills that you learn from being in retail, you know, customer service, problem solving, conflict, you know, these are all skill sets that you're taking to any role that you go into. You know, and it kind of just ties into your point of, you know, maybe it's not what we expected or a job that we thought we would be in, right? But it's an entry-level job, you know, specifically for you that really opened up that door, because if you didn't go into retail at Microsoft, you wouldn't be in the role where you're at today. So I think it's really, really important to really highlight that sometimes we get into roles or jobs that we may not enjoy, or it's our first jobs and it's something that we don't enjoy, but those experiences and those skills could really lead to something bigger and better. So
yeah, the final thought I have on that, and then we'll need to wrap up, is you can teach hard skills. Those are easy to learn. Soft skills are much more challenging, and retail is a great place to learn those because of all the stuff you just listed about customer service and problem solving and interacting. And you know, that's an opportunity you have there to really explore the good and bad of soft skills and interacting with people, and that I promise you is going to serve you well in your career going forward. Like, I can teach people how to do a compliance check. Like, you follow a checklist, like that's a hard skill. I can teach you that. What is much harder to teach is how to present that information in front of a board of executives in a way that makes sense to them, you know, and that you can speak confidently to. So yeah, I can't overstate the value of retail. It's just the human connection. Like, honestly, especially in a post-pandemic world, like That's important. That's very important. So yeah, on that final thought, you know, I hope this has been helpful and informative. I'm absolutely available. People are welcome to find me on LinkedIn, connect with me there. You know, the Inclusive Tech Lab resources are always available. As I said, we're first and foremost dedicated to the community, and you as the community, you know, are welcome here anytime, whether that's, you know, in person, whether that's virtually, you know, if there's anything we can do to help, you know, the best way to get in contact with us is through the Inclusive Tech Lab website, which you've got the link for. So yeah, we're here for you. That's why we exist. So
Thank you so much, Solomon, for your time. Very informative, and just for you sharing your journey. You know, our YEP participants, you know, are greatly, greatly appreciated of it. You know, and just your support, you know, within our workforce development programs here at the Amputee Coalition. Very, very grateful. So thank you so much. And we look forward to collaborating and chatting soon.
yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you.
Have a good, yeah, have a good day, everybody, and talk soon.
Thank
Talk to you.
you.
Have a good one.
Take
Thanks.
care.
Bye.